Hey, Angelo, how's it going?
Pretty good, man. How are you today?
I'm doing great today. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. Angelo, for those who are listening, why don't you give a little bit of background about yourself and what you're doing?
Good, man. I'm the strength and conditioning coach at Seton Hall University up in South Orange, New Jersey. I've been in this position since 2005. So this is my 20th school year in the same place, which is it's really unheard of in strength and conditioning or college sports in general. But I found I'm a New Jersey guy. I like it here. I grew up a Seton Hall fan. My
Mm,
family's here. I'm raising my family here now. It's been a really good fit, and I like where I am, and I like what I'm doing. And then the next thing I have coming out in my 20th year at Seton Hall, I'm publishing a book the next 4 years about making that transition from high school sports to college sports. From a physical side, I came across your podcast in
hmm
the summer. You have one of our swimmers, Natalie Himes, done a
Yep.
great job for our program. This is her fifth year with us. She's killing it. And I listened to that interview, and then I went back and retroactively listened to most of your other episodes. And I think we're two guys kind of speaking the same language, that
hmm
there's so much information about how to get to college, how to get that scholarship offer. There's really comparatively little information on what to do once you get there, right?
Yeah.
So I say it in the book. It sounds a little cliche, but it's true. A lot of kids, a lot of families look at signing that national letter of intent as the finish line. In
hmm
reality, that's the starting line, right? And I've always said, as a strength and conditioning coach, I want to be part of making this experience the best 4 years of somebody's life, and not see kids transfer and not like the sport and quit or only do it for the scholarship. And I
hmm
think, what I'm doing on the physical side and you're doing on the mental side,
hmm
super valuable to a big part of our population. So I'm super happy to have this conversation today.
Yeah, and you're living it. You've been on the inside at a university for almost 20 years, so you have a lot more knowledge on that subject from being in it. I'm taking it from the outside, never having worked in a university, although I've spent some time in the setting. So like in that 20 years, like what would you say are like the biggest changes that you've seen in student athletes coming in to the program there at Seton Hall?
Okay, well, the one thing that hasn't changed is the one thing that has kind of made me want to write this book and speak on this topic is anywhere I've been, every college I've been at, everybody I talk to, kids are coming in unprepared for the level of work being done in college. And we'll talk about why it is a little bit later,
Okay.
but just the level of just lack of, and I don't think it's kids aren't trying, I don't think they're being lazy. I think it's just the information
Yeah.
of how to prepare and the jump you take from high school to college, even at a great high school, that information isn't really out there. We're not telling kids and families how to prepare for that mentally or physically. And that's why what we're doing is super valuable, right? The biggest thing that's changed in the last couple of years, they say COVID, is the transfer portal and NLI deals, right?
hmm
Where back before 2019, almost nobody transferred, at least out of school like Seton Hall. We graduated most of our freshmen, right? So the typical newcomer was
hmm
17 to 18 years old, fresh out of high school, not injured, not post-operative surgery, didn't have overuse injuries yet. It was like buying a new car to a large extent, to use an analogy, right? Now our typical newcomer might be 21 or 22,
hmm
second or third college, maybe already got injured, maybe already dealing with overuse injuries, already has whatever mental baggage comes from playing for two or three more programs.
Yeah.
So now it's like we went from buying new cars to buying used cars, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but we're dealing with a different population, right? And I think you're seeing that really across the board. I think the transfer portal is a good thing for student athletes and their families, but it does change what we're doing in our role a little bit because we're dealing with a different population.
Well, you actually, I mean, transfer portal comes up all the time, but I think it's interesting when you were speaking. Like, I thought about the difference between somebody like you, who is a strength and conditioning coach, and then say a head coach on a team staff. Right? As a head coach, you might love it because you're getting somebody who's been kind of tested and proven over a few years. You're kind of getting a known entity coming in from another school. For you, you might have to undo some of the habits that these athletes have learned in other strength and conditioning programs if it doesn't align with your philosophy or the way you do things. So, like, do you find yourself having to sort of reteach or have these transfer students come in and sort of relearn things?
Yes, right. But one thing I think there's a kind of probably the most common misnomer about college strength and conditioning coaches are people think we're doing this super high level, super fine tuned specific training,
Mm-hmm.
and a baseball shortstop is training different than the third baseman is training different than the first baseman, right? And there's a place for that. I really think there is. But really, at the college level, we're dealing with such novices in the weight room About
Mhm.
75, 80% of what we're doing is the same across the board for most of our athletes, right? And part of that is they're just coming to us and not knowing just basic movement patterns. They're kids that can't squat, can't lunge, can't push or pull with their upper body. So I think most people are shocked at how baseline and foundational, at least freshman year of college
Mhm.
weightlifting really is, right? Now, then if things go well, kids pick up on things, kids go home and train in the summer on their own and come back better. We can move ahead and do some better things, right? But I think there's such a lack of quality training at kind of all levels that when you get a freshman group in any sport in the college setting, you're really starting at square one no matter what, and then you hope to progress to square 4 or 5 by the time they graduate.
Yeah. So I wanted to. I was thinking, while you were sharing that, one of the things that I was telling you before we started recording, I have two children, and they go to a high school here in New Jersey, and we kind of live close together. And my daughter just started lifting as a freshman, so she was just introduced to it this summer. And I had a recent exchange with her, and she said, "Dad," she's like, I deadlifted with the trap bar 170, and she's like, "Oh, my friend's doing more. I only did 170." I said, "That's great, honey. You just started doing this. You're going to be doing 300 in no time." And so, but for her, like she had this sort of like the way she looks at it is like, I'm not good enough. And she's comparing herself to other people. Is that a dynamic you see with kids who are new to lifting where they look around the room and go, "Oh, I'm not as strong as so and so"? Like, do they lose their confidence when they see other people not doing what they can do? Go ahead.
Yes, I do see it, and I think it's such a tough age group, right? For two reasons. Number one, high school and college kids are kind of figuring out who they are, where they fit in the world, right? It might be their first time kind of branching out, doing things away from their parents or their close relatives, brothers, sisters,
Mhm.
stuff like that. And their natural interest to compare themselves to each other, right? You put on top of that, athletes in that age group are naturally competitive. That's why they're
Mhm.
playing sports against other kids, right? And I think that could be good, but it gets dangerous when someone that can comfortably deadlift 170 puts 225 on the bar and gets hurt, right? So what I always tell people is, and if you can convince your kids to believe this, you're a better parent, teacher, coach than me, because it's a real hard conversation to have. It's not about you and the person in the next squat rack. It's about you today versus you a year ago or a month ago or a week ago. And it's really about my favorite thing about the weight room is that everybody can be successful because it's about personal improvement, right? If I'm on me and 10 guys walk in the gym, I might never be the strongest of the 10, but I might be the strongest version of me and stronger than I was a year ago. And I won if I could do that, right? But I think it's just a tough age, and naturally competitive people gravitate towards sports. It's really hard. Can we say where your kids go to high school? Can we shout that out or not?
Yeah, sure.
They go to Rumson Fairhaven. I'm from
My
Monmouth County as
Yep.
well. And they work with a great strength coach there, Rob O'Rock. I've been in his weight room before. He's been in several NCAA events that I've hosted. We got to become friends over the year. And he's running a college program, right? But I think he does a great job at making things age and ability level specific, where
Mhm.
an incoming freshman soccer player like your daughter is able to train and get better. In the same way a junior, rising senior high school football player is able to get better,
Yes.
right? And I think he's really doing a great job with
Yeah.
that. And part of the reason for the book is that there's not that many guys like him out there, right? There
Nope.
really isn't. Most of the kids, if you go to a public high school, that's not a thing. You guys are super fortunate to have that.
Yeah.
And honestly, so was I. I didn't grow up in Monmouth County. I grew up in Ocean County. I know you're already sitting there thinking you're better than me because of that, right? But
No.
but I went to Tom's and Reese, and we had a weight room and a strength coach, and that exposure to that at a very young age kind of shaped the rest of my life, right? As far as just
Mhm.
I started lifting weights to get good at sports, fell in love with it, and that created the outline for the rest of my life. So I think that high school experience is super valuable. And if you have access to that at your school, definitely take advantage of it. Because what I tell parents all the time is this: if I deal at Seton Hall, we're a Division I school, we're in the Big East, we're not in the Power Five, but we get some really good athletes here, right? All of our baseball, softball, soccer players, swimmers, they were the best athlete in their high school, maybe the county,
Yeah.
right? And we have the majority of our kids coming freshman year and cannot squat, lunge, do a pull up, do a push up. And these are the best kids in the high
Yeah.
school sports setting, right? Think about what the rest of the high school kids are like when they're graduating.
Yeah.
So I always say, if you're a parent, you're a high school phys ed teacher or coach, if you can teach your kids just the basic movement patterns and efficient movement patterns, good running technique, good landing mechanics when they're doing plyos, you can be way ahead of the pack just by teaching and doing the basics well. And then if you then you can add sports skill on top of it. I think what we see in my profession, a little more than probably other ones, is everybody knows the foundation of strength training, right? It's
Mhm.
progressive overload, it's rest and recovery, and get good at the basics. The problem is in the multi-billion-dollar fitness industry, you can't really sell the basics because everybody knows the basics, right? So every Instagram account, every YouTube, every personal trainer is how to do the super high-end stuff that in most cases kids aren't ready for. And the joke I always make is we got 13-year-olds doing single arm dumbbell presses on a physio ball that can't do a push-up. Now, there's a place for that single arm dumbbell press. There
Right.
is, but not for the kid that can't do a push up. So
Sure.
let's get good at the old school stuff and then progress as soon as possible. We got people selling the second, third floor of the house and not worried about the foundation, and that's a recipe for disaster. And if you look at the injury rates of college athletes,
Mhm.
it is a disaster. There's no way to argue that.
Yeah. So I want to touch on a couple of things that you talked about. One is to go back, about comparisons to others and to yourself, right? That's something that I talk a lot about. I teach to my clients. I'm a big believer in is having a growth mindset, right? And when you're coming in to compete at a place like Seton Hall, just as an example, Division 1 level, right? You've probably been the best athlete in your school, in your area for a long time, right? Everybody's probably praised you for a very long time about how great you are and how wonderful you are. Now you get to a place like Seton Hall, right? Or any Division 1
Yep.
school, and you're just like everybody else, right? You're not the big fish in a small pond anymore, right? Which is kind of what you're describing. And athletes don't necessarily have that growth mindset of, hey, I just want to come in on day one and get better so that by the time I leave here in 4 or 5 years, I'm getting the most out of my experience, going to be the best I can be versus, hey, I've got to be better than so and so. And listen, there is an element of natural competitiveness, right? People want to play, but at the same time, it's like, well, if you're always comparing yourself to somebody else, the ultimate, like the worst case scenario is you burn out and you quit, which is not uncommon, right? Like a lot of college athletes drop out because it's just too much.
Yeah, I think one thing, and I'm going to explain this. I want to be very careful with my words here. I think one thing in the college recruiting process that is overlooked is coaches will often start recruiting a young man or young woman and tell them everything they want to hear
Sure.
to get them to sign on the dotted line, right? And a lot of times, what young people don't want to hear is athletically right now, you're a 6. We think you can mature into an 8 or 9 and play here your junior year and really contribute to the program. But right now, you need a year in the weight room, a year learning the playbook, a year changing your body composition, and we think you're going to be a player for us in the
Mhm.
future. Because if you come clean and tell a young kid that, they're going to go to the
Yeah.
school that tells them they're going to play immediately,
Right.
right? And then they get on campus, and let's keep it real. College freshmen are boys and girls. College
Hmm.
seniors are men and
Man.
women. It's a different ballgame, right?
Yep.
And even if you were the most preternaturally gifted, whatever sport player your freshman year in high school, your senior year in high school, when you get to freshman year in college, it's a different game, right?
Hmm.
So I think we should be a little more honest with kids and be like, look, we're going to recruit you based
Hmm.
on your potential. We think you're going to be a really good player soon, but you got to really commit to taking care of your body, maybe getting bigger if that's the case, maybe dropping some body fat if that's the case, maybe getting more mobile, whatever it is. But take the first year or two and really build that foundation. So when the starting point guard that's a senior in your freshman graduates, you're ready to step in and play right away. And I think that's one thing. 4 years and now and then maybe 5 years with the grad year stuff going on, it
Hmm.
seems like a long time, right? And it is. It's a quarter of your life if you're 20 years old, but about a quarter of your life. But also, it goes by quick. And I think a lot of times you got to kind of have a mindset somewhere between the two, right? The
Yeah.
mindset's got to be
Right.
I'm not here forever, but I do have time to develop and hone my craft
Hmm.
and get my body better every year I'm here and take advantage of that as well. And I think I think competition can be a good thing as long as in the weight room, if it's done safely and with, proper progressive overload, proper rest and recovery. Like if I'm a senior and I'm looking at the juniors, if I'm a freshman and I'm looking at the juniors, eventually I want to be putting plates
Right.
on the bar and all the other stuff, but it can't be today. I got to work my way up there and do the freshman stuff until I get to be a sophomore, get to be a junior. And then the cliche, you got to trust the process, right? If you committed to play at a program that's been successful and has put a lot of kids in professional sports and has done well in the conference they're in, you got to just kind of let go a little bit and trust the program in some cases and progress the way you're supposed to progress.
Yeah. So one more question on that before we get to talking a little bit more about the book that you've written and what that's all about. But I am curious. Like I think when we talked previously, you said you work with the baseball team there.
Yeah, I work with all the sports, but I'm a bit because of the size of the team, how many guys we have. I work with baseball a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, so baseball is an example, right? Like I'm probably most familiar with baseball and the baseball landscape out there and how players are kind of exposed in high school to travel baseball and training and some of the things they're able to do. Some of these kids, I'm sure over 20 years, the velocities that you see kids come in and be able to throw today are different than, in the early 2000s just because of the nature of the training. Like how much of like that impacts what you do, meaning like in a sport like baseball where kids are maybe more advanced and they are lifting heavier and they are throwing harder and they're getting all this information, whether it's from a private trainer or the internet or wherever, like how much of that affects what you do? Does it make it easier? Does it make it harder? Does it make it both?
I'm not sure. The amount of information out there is a blessing and a curse, right? Like so
Yeah.
many things. The idea that I could go on Instagram right now and find literally 500 accounts dedicated to how to
Right.
train baseball guys in the weight room, and I
Yep.
could pick and choose what I like from each one. If you would have told me that was a possibility in 2005, say, I'd be like, that's insanity. I would have to read 500 books and call people, ask questions. Now that's all over, right? It's easier. The
Mhm.
information's out there. What I think the hardest part is finding everything out there and finding what works for your population and your facility, right? Because there's things like I can watch what the Yankees do pregame, but if we don't have access to any of that and I don't have 5 assistants, that's not going to work at Seton Hall,
Right.
right? Or the joke I always make is when people find out what I do, they want to talk about their kids' training. Like, well, I heard Aaron Judge does X, so my 8-year-old is also going to do X. That ain't going to work for too long, right? Aaron Judge is a 28 or so year old specimen, maybe the best player we've ever seen. Your seventh grader might be really good, but if you train him like a 28-year-old freak of nature, he's not going to play for very long, right?
Right.
So I think that you got to be smart enough to sift through the information out there and apply it to your population. And one thing I think that's kind of good in my case, being somewhere so long, which is an anomaly in college sports, I
Yeah.
know our population really well, right? I know our facility at the back of my hand. I know
Yeah.
our coaching staffs really well, and I have a pretty good idea of what we can implement and what we can't. Now that being, you got to be open. You got to try new things. If you're going to ask your players to have a growth mindset, you got to have one as a coach. I really believe that. But
100%.
to some
Yes.
extent, you got to be a little smarter what you implement and maybe do some incremental changes instead of just sweeping changes every year.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about the book. The book's called The Next 4 Years. So like what inspired you to write? There it is. What inspired you to write the book?
It was just being at the college level for probably about 15 years. About in 2018, I started doing a presentation at conferences
Hmm.
about preparing for college sports. Because if most high school strength coaches, most high school sport coaches, and then the entire AAU basketball world, travel baseball world, all the personal training facilities out there, their goal and their selling point is kind of like, well, help your kid play at the quote unquote next level, right?
Hmm.
The problem is most of the people selling that have never played at the next level or been around the next level. And what you really takes to compete at the next level isn't really out there, right? The best players are being recruited by coaches that are selling them the best part of the dream, which might be all true, but there's also another side of that coin, right?
Hmm.
Like we're going to show you a great weight room. We're not going to tell you you're going to be there at 6 o'clock every morning against your will, right? We're going to show you, oh, you get to travel to Chicago, but you take a bus and you get back on the bus trip at 7:15 in the morning after a red eye flight and you go to class at 8 a.m. the next day. So I think the some ways, let's start telling people the truth. And the example I give all the time is that if you look at how uninformed most college consumers are, I look at it like this. First time you buy a car when you're 17, 18 years old, you don't know the automotive industry. Buying a car is a complete shot in the dark.
Hmm.
Second time you buy a car, little better experience. You know what gas mileage is. You know what brake pads look like, right? By the time you buy your fifth car, you know what you want. You know what
Hmm.
dealership to go to. You know what a payment plan should be. You buy a better car your fifth time, right? Well, nobody goes to college 5 times. right? It's an experience you make once, maybe twice in your
Yeah.
life. And if you
Uh-huh.
make a bad decision, you affect the financial future of your entire life moving forward. And then if you have a student athlete that's going to play and possibly get a scholarship, that's an even smaller percentage of people that get to go down that road, right?
Yeah.
And it's mostly, a lot of families, it's their first generation dealing with
Yes.
college. And how do you make those decisions? And my goal for every student athlete I deal with when I meet them their freshman year is them to have a great 4 year experience at Seton Hall, graduate, write me a card that said they had a ball, I helped them out, and they're going to have great lives either playing sports or not, right? Now, I'm going to be honest with you, in a transfer portal era, that number is going progressively down of kids that
Yeah.
come in freshman year and graduate with us. But that being said, I think if you're a strength coach, you're an athletic trainer, you're an academic person, my goal is to help the transition be as smooth as possible. And I just want to write. I wanted to write the book to help people outside of
Yeah.
South Orange, New Jersey, because I don't think that information is really out there.
Yeah, for sure. And that was one of the things that I started to get really curious about when I worked in high schools. When I was working in a high school, it was like, well, I've got these kids that I'm working with, and I look at them in that environment and go, these kids are really good. They're really good at their sport, and they're committed to go play college at, college sport, mostly baseball players, right? They're ready to go to the next level. What's it going to be like for them, right? And they don't really know, right? You think you know, but you don't know until you get there. And so for me, it's about having transferable skills, right? To walk in and be able to say, okay, like, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but if something like this happens, here are the things that I could do to make it a better situation for myself. Right. And so for I mean, as somebody who works in that environment, right, you don't necessarily have that, luxury in your job, meaning you get what you get, right? Whoever comes in, you got to deal with. But the book is, hey, this is what I've seen, and retrospectively, I can look back and say, hey, based on what I've learned over 20 years, here's what you need to think about. So, what are like some of the key takeaways in the book? I'm sure there are plenty, right? But like,
Yeah,
if there are 2 or 3 things you could sort of highlight that you think are really important, I'd love to hear about it.
great. The three I would say off top. Number one, when you commit to go to a school, contact at the bare minimum the strength and conditioning coach, maybe the athletic trainer, and find out. And you'll be in contact with the head coach already. But get as much information about the program as you can before you get there.
Yeah,
Right? What do we train early in the morning? Do we train at night? Do we run sprints? Do we run distance? Do we have a conditioning test?
yeah,
Because being physically prepared for what you're getting into is the one that the kind of what you deal with on your show. There's a mental and emotional transition to being away from home and being in college. But
yeah,
I feel like if you go out of your way to take care of the physical side of it, that's one less thing you have to worry about when you get there, right? When I tell parents all the time, and I really believe this, if you commit to go to a school and you call or email the strength coach and he or she doesn't get back to you, you pick the wrong school. I look at it like these student athletes are going to give me 4 years of their life. I got to give them a phone call at the
hmm,
very least, right? And then so understand what's going to be expected of you, and then realistically assess where you are now and start getting ready for that, right? Like if you know, for example, your team, say a soccer team, you got to run a 6 minute mile the first
yeah,
day of practice, and you're running 9 minute miles. Figure out a way to get better at that. That's a deficiency. That's fine, but don't put a bullseye on your back by being the kid that's labeled out of shape, not ready for camp, not ready for practice. You can take a lot of stress off your plate by doing that. And the one thing I really liked on your show, you talked maybe earlier this summer or fall in a couple episodes about enjoying your summer, right? I believe you should enjoy your summer. And that summer after your senior year is special. It's prom, it's graduation. It might be a trip with your friends. It might be your last family vacation before you move out of that. It's a special time. If you live at the Jersey Shore, it's
hmm,
even more special, right? Because you got Belmar, you got Asbury, you got Long Branch. It's a special place to live. You can go have a great summer and train an hour, 2 hours a day, maybe first thing in the morning, and then go and have a blast the rest of the day,
yep,
right? I think people sometimes think like, oh, I'm training now or I'm not training now. But
right.
in reality, training should be a part of your life all the time. And then you could go have a summer job. You could go on vacation this week, whatever it is. But kind of just have a great summer and train around it. I
So
think those are the two biggest things.
okay. So I'm glad you brought that up, right? Because I've actually dealt with specifically with a college athlete who's still in college who actually has had a lot of anxiety about testing, right? And I think to your point, and she's much further along in her career, she's a senior now. But I think I can only envision the idea that when she's playing a Power 4 conference soccer
Okay.
level, right? I think what you described there is probably what she didn't do, which was like understanding the requirements, right? Going into it. I just want to play here. You're going to offer me a scholarship. I'm going to come. And then from day one, fitness was an issue, right? For her because she wasn't prepared. And then it just spiraled into something much, much bigger. And I had to sort of help her through the process of developing a bit of a growth mindset and saying, hey, like, you're not passing this beep test. You're this far away. What do we do every single day to keep moving in that direction to not only improve, but build confidence that I can handle this? Do you see that with kids who come into maybe sports, especially where endurance is an issue and not only not physically prepared, but the mental side of it sort of drags them down?
Yes, and I see a thing in some of our athletes, which is I don't use the word weird because I feel it's that kind of a cliche. We have a weird thing of like kids that are physically prepared and will pass the conditioning test, having anxiety going into a test they know they're prepared for.
Yeah.
Like one of our programs runs a test every year that it's pretty easy. Like if you do any conditioning over the summer, you'll pass it, right? And the coach just wants it as a little bit of a check to make sure they did something over the summer, and then we start practice. And the week, like the last week of summer, the kids will start going back to campus, and they'll be in my office, kind of like really upset about it. Like, well, you've passed the test the previous 3 years. Last year, everyone on the team passed the test. It's a fair test. It's not that hard. That is 100% pass rate. What are you so nervous about? Which is probably not the best way to approach that. And then you have a hard time articulating it because these tests that, like you said, the beep test in soccer, maybe 300-yard shuttles in certain court sports, whatever it is, have
Mm-hmm.
become so much bigger in their mind than they
Yes.
actually are, right? And I think one way to look at it now, if you have a head coach or a strength coach that is unreasonable and putting ridiculous numbers up that nobody can do, and you're just posting them to be mad at people and start the season with a bang, that you got to take those outliers out of this conversation, right? But if it's a fair test that an average 18 to 22-year-old person in this sport can pass, why can't you? We brought you here because we thought you'd be a part of this program and pass as part of the program. And I
Mm-hmm.
think you kind of insinuate and tell them if you can't do it in June, here's some steps to take to get to pass it in August, right? There's a pretty decent part of the book about that too, about the common tests, the ones that are out there, whether it's 300-yard shuttles, the mile, whatever it might
Yeah.
be, how to build that conditioning around the summer to be able to do it, because you might, if you can't do it now, it doesn't mean you're never going to be able to do it, right? If we're going to use endurance as an example, every single person that runs a marathon at some point in their life couldn't run a marathon,
Yep.
right? And they figured out a way to make that happen. So there's no reason you can't figure out a way to make a beep test happen or whatever, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, one of the things, I think about there is, especially with endurance sports or sport like soccer or anything that requires like long-term and, fitness and endurance is, if the coach values that, right, at a high level, like if fitness is really, really important to a soccer coach or whoever, right, like asking those questions up front, to your point earlier, is really important because then I know coming into the equation, hey, this is what's important to the coach. This might dictate playing time more than anything. So where do I put my focus, right? I talk to kids about this all the time. It's like, well, if I know the answer to the test question or I understand what this coach wants from me, I may not like it. I may not agree with it, but at least I know. And then I could go try to figure out a solution to that. Like you said, like do some sort of incremental training to at least try to build up to that, right? Knowing that this is the priority. And I think a lot of kids, I think, get so overwhelmed by this stuff. Like they just get so spread thin or they just ignore, the things that make them uncomfortable that they walk into the situation thinking it's going to be different. And then it's not. And then they just get overwhelmed. And then they show up the day before the test and go, I don't know if I'm going to pass, well, you know, you probably should have prepared for it. And if you did, what are you worried about? Right. But like, it's a really daunting thing.
Yeah, I think there's two good lessons. The first one is we don't use this word because we don't call student athletes employees, right? But to some
Mm-hmm.
extent, your coach is your boss. I think there's a good lesson when you grow up and if you have a job and don't work for yourself, you're gonna have a boss and you're gonna do things their way, right? And if their way is everybody on my team runs a 6-minute mile, and you think that's silly, you still got to run a 6-minute mile, or
Right.
you got to go find another boss. And that's just kind of the way the real world works. And I think that's a good example of college athletics being an educational experience, right? Prepare
Mm-hmm.
them for the quote unquote real world. The other thing I say to people, and I talk about it a lot in the book, we have a thing, I call it strength versus conditioning. Now, to be good at it as athletics, you got to do both, right? But you only got so many hours a day, so much energy, so long your body going to hold out. At some point, you got to decide I'm going to focus on one or the other
Yeah.
at least a little bit, right? And I tell incoming freshmen all the time, if you got to pick one or the other, pick conditioning, and here's why. If you walk in the Seton Hall weight room, when let's say baseball, an example, and
Mhm.
there's 20 position guys at a time. There's EDM techno music blaring because they're all like me, just Jersey Shore Guido meatheads, and that's what we're doing and listening to, right? 158 beats per minute or nothing. And you're not that strong, or you need a spot, or you can't put as many plates on as the guy next to you. You get lost in that sauce a little bit, right? You can hide a little bit in the weight room till you get up to speed, and not have the coaches staring at you and picking you out all the time, right?
Mhm.
Go to a running session, go to a conditioning drill, and the worst person on the field is obvious to even a bystander barely paying attention, right? And if you're constantly the last person to finish every drill, need more recovery time, throwing up in between reps in the garbage can, you automatically put a bullseye on your back moving forward in that program, right?
Mhm.
So I tell kids all the time, if you don't have to be, you don't know everything in the weight room, you don't have to be great at Olympic lifts, get reasonably strong and then crush the conditioning so that you're at least, if nothing else, in the pack, if not ahead of the pack, on those conditioning drills that everybody's out there watching, right? Because just the optics of being the last person in a sprint test is really bad. The optics of maybe needing some extra help in the weight room, a little bit better, especially for new kids.
That's a really interesting perspective, and I like that example because it is a good example of, hey, you've got to focus your attention on one thing, right? You can't focus your attention on everything because then nothing gets done, right? You have to, especially, you talk about this a little bit in the intro to your book or the beginning of the book, which I had a chance to look at before we started recording. The idea that there's only so many hours in the day, right? You're structured from the time you wake up till the end of the day. There's always something to do, right? There's not a lot of free time. So if you need to get better at one thing, you kind of got to narrow it down because you can't do everything because your time's already spoken for. So like pick that one thing that's sort of the lowest hanging fruit and go after it because otherwise you're going to be spreading yourself too thin.
And I'll tell you real quick, one thing, the way I look at this as a college strength coach, and most of our head coaches agree with us when we have these conversations. If you tell me when you report to campus, you couldn't get in a weight room this summer, you had a job, there's no gym close to your house, there's whatever, you couldn't get in the weight room. My first answer is going to be that if they tell me they can't afford it, I may do it. Did you buy one new pair of sneakers this summer? Yeah. Then you couldn't afford a 3-month gym membership.
Mm-hmm.
Every gym in America makes deals in the summer for college kids.
Yeah.
If you came back with one pair of cool sneakers, you could have bought a gym membership. But I'm not going to count your money. That's up to you, right? Give me the reason you didn't run this summer. Why would you? You need nothing to do it. You
Mm-hmm.
live on a street, run up and down the street, go
Yeah.
to a park. It costs nothing. The parks don't close down. Your backyard doesn't close down. So to me, if it's a borderline kid I'm dealing with, they tell me they couldn't lift in the summer. I don't like it, but I understand how that might be a reality for their life, right? But if you come back out of shape, tell me why
Mm-hmm.
you couldn't run. I run 3-4 days a week. It costs me nothing. Figure it
Mm-hmm.
out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think, I guess that raises a question because one of the things that um, I think is really important is being able to, as a student athlete coming in, being able to find the help that you need and ask for the help that you need, right? Like knowing that there are plenty of resources if you choose to find them and then tap into them, right? So like what's your experience with student athletes like coming to you and asking for help versus you kind of seeking them out or like giving them the feedback without them sort of asking you for anything? Like, what's that dynamic like for you as a strength and conditioning coach?
It I don't know. I'd say it's more on the side of them coming to me. It might be a little bit the kind of personality that I have, the amount of time I've been here, a pretty
Mm-hmm.
trusted face on campus for most people, and I have a kind of personality people like to talk to me about stuff, which I think is a super valuable and tangible for a strength and conditioning
Mm-hmm.
coach to have, or really any support to that person, obviously on the mental side of things as well, right? But if people come to me and tell me they're struggling, if it's something I can help you with, like I can't pass a conditioning test, all right, we'll come in the weight room. We're going to run on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. That's a fairly easy one, right? Some of the issues you get greeted with are much bigger than that, right? It might be disordered eating. It might be problems with a significant other. It
Yeah.
might be, not being able to pass classes. And in that case, you got to know what you don't know at some point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can come in the office and talk to me all day, but at the end of the day, if you have to refer to a specialist, I'm going to put you in contact with that person as best I can. Because I think you have to know where your expertise is,
Sure.
right? If you want to know how to play in the Big East and be physically prepared for it, I'm pretty good at that, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to tell me you're having a problem with your boyfriend threatening violence against you every
Yes.
night, that's got to go somewhere other than me. That's not I don't know how
Yeah.
to handle that at all, right? But you do deal with that. Something we got to be smarter. Now, one thing we're lucky about on this campus is we have a lot of resources, right? We're
Hmm.
very lucky with that. I'm about to say Rolodex and date myself, but I have a contact list of people we could call and get
Yeah.
involved and hopefully help people out. But I think the one thing with college athletes, and I think if we could enforce this on them a little bit, not enforce them, encourage them a little bit to seek the help that's there, right?
Yeah.
There's probably not
Exactly.
another time in your life where this many specialists are at your disposal for
Hmm.
basically no cost. If you're struggling, make the call. Figure out, talk to somebody that's an expert and do it, because the downside of that is you don't address a small problem, it becomes a big problem. And now the
Hmm.
conversation isn't how do I get better at X, it's how do I get in the transfer portal? How do I go home? How do I not do this and try getting
Yes.
extra at another college? So I think you got to just nip it in the bud as best you
Yeah.
can and deal with a small problem before it's a big problem. And that's why I think a service like yours is so
Yeah.
valuable, that you're teaching that to high school kids and they're seeking help early and hopefully going to have that process their whole life.
Yeah. That is basically my interest in asking that question. And it's interesting because I think you can, somebody like me or you, we're speaking from two sides of the same coin, in the sense that, like, I have to know the limits of my competence as well, right? Like what I'm capable of, right? If somebody tells me they're going through the same thing that you just described, they're having an issue where they may be in danger, like that's also not up to me, right? I have to be able to send them to the right resource so they can get the help that they need. But it's not always that dire. And I think you can tell kids, hey, you need to look for the help. Here's where the help is. This is about getting better. And still there's sort of this reluctance to ask for the help. And I've talked about this on a couple of podcasts of like, hey, even though I know I need help, I don't want to ask because I don't want to seem weak. I don't want people to think that I have a problem. Like, I don't want my coach to use it against me, whatever. Find all the excuses and reasons that you want, right? But at the end of the day, if your goal is to become the best athlete you can be, you can't do it on your own, right? And I think that's, for me, that's the most important thing. And when you're in high school, and I think, again, like you referenced this a little bit in the parts of the book that I read, which is like in high school, like it's just not as you have it under control because you are good and you have relationships and you know your coach for a long time, and it's just not as intense. And then you get to a new place and you have to build a new relationship with a coach and figure out campus and make new friends and figure out how to deal with academics. Now it's like this overwhelming like avalanche coming down on your head. If you don't look for that help to chip away at some of these things you don't know how to do, it's just going to become overwhelming. And the next thing you're going to do is get me out of here, right? Whether it's a transfer portal or I'm dropping out, I'm going to community college because I can't handle this, whatever it is, right? Like, being able to be proactive in that approach, looking for help is it makes sense logically, but it's hard for kids to do.
It is. And one thing I think it would help a lot of freshmen out, just across the board, is finding your crew as soon as possible. What I mean, you had a
Mm-hmm.
couple good friends that you could talk to and be open with. Because think about it, if you grew up in the same town from kindergarten to high school, you might have friends for 12, 13 years already by
Yeah.
the time you're a freshman in college. Now, none of them are around. Now, we live in a good era. You could text, you could call, you could DM your friends from back
Mm-hmm.
home. But the issue with that is it's hard to get advice from somebody who's living a completely different
Different
life than
life.
you, right? So I think try to get some student athletes that are your tight friends right away. And then try to find some adults on campus that you can trust and talk to
Mm-hmm.
about things,
Yes.
right? Might be the strength coach, might be the athletic trainer, might be the academic person, it might be an assistant coach. But a head coach is hard. That relationship's not
Yeah.
always going to be there just based on the business of college athletics. But
Yes.
try to find some people around campus that you can run things by. And I would say, like, in no sense or fashion am I qualified to give a student athlete advice like I'm their father, right? But I do know their day to day life and the people they're dealing with and the circumstances probably better than their actual parents do because I'm in the same building with
Yeah.
them every day. So I think find a couple adults you could trust and bounce things off of and hopefully get some, and then go to the proper channels after that.
Yeah.
But being able to have the conversation with people that are in the same struggle as you is super valuable. I think the biggest thing I see with freshmen is they went through whatever struggle they had with the same people for like 15 years by the time they get
Mhm.
to college, right? From kindergarten to senior in high school. And then they go to college, and that entire support system is removed. So they try to find a support system as soon as possible. The joke I make when I present on this is when you're a senior in high school, you live in a house with your family. When you're a freshman in college, you live in a dorm with some kid you just met. And that's the beginning of the changes, right?
Mhm.
So you try to be smart about that and find some people that can help you out and utilize the service and involve your family and ask for outside advice and help when you need it. But just kind of get a little tribe or a crew around you on
Yeah.
campus as soon as possible.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I think that's really, really important. It's actually something that something I have in my freshman foundation course, which is thinking about building a support network before you get there, right?
Yeah.
Like, what kind of people do you want around you? It doesn't have to be athletes necessarily, right? It could be someone in the class. It can be an adult, but like, who are the kind of people you want to be around so you know what to look for when you get there? And I think sometimes and I had this experience in college myself, you kind of go there and you just stumble into people and you
Yep.
just grab on to people who are there because you don't have anybody else, but they may not be the kind of people you want to rely on or you would normally be friends with. And now that actually can create more stress and more anxiety because this is not what I'm used to. And now I'm trying to navigate all this other stuff that makes being an athlete even harder.
And the one thing I would say about that group you're going to have around you, right? Keep an eye on the future as well, not just when you're a senior on the
Yeah,
team,
I like
but
that.
what you want to do after. So, for example, if you're a college basketball player and you want to go to law school, chances are statistically most of your teammates will not go to law school, just the way that goes, right?
Right.
But can you meet some people in the poli sci department, in the pre-law department? Can you make some connections with professors so that when you want to make that transition and take the LSAT and go to law school, you know people in that world, right? Like the LSAT exam is hard enough. Think about taking that, and nobody in your life ever took that exam or applied to law school before.
Mm-hmm.
So if you kind of know what you want to do, it can make some connections long term. That's only going to help your post sports career even better. Like one of our biggest advantages at SHU is we're 7 miles from Manhattan, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the kids that are smart that major in business all intern in the city, two
Mm-hmm.
or three summers, and have multiple job offers when they graduate from our business school, right? That's the way to do this, in my opinion. One of the best ways to go through Seton
Yeah.
Hall. But if you're not looking outside of the very small fishbowl of your team in the athletic department, you're not meeting the people that set you up with the internship, that set you up with your first job offer, that put you on the corporate ladder to a good, hopefully financially successful life,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think also, be a part of your team, be cool with your teammates, have great friends, great lessons with your strength coach, athletic trainer.
Mm-hmm.
But the other people on campus will really probably be more valuable to your career
That's
because
interesting.
very few of us make a career in athletics. So try to think of and think outside that very limited fishbowl of the athletic department.
I think that's a great piece of advice because I think that there's so much tunnel vision about the next 4 or 5 years and you're not thinking about, okay, what am I going to do when this is over? That's another conversation entirely we won't get into, but 4 or 5 years, like you said, it's a long time, but it's not that long. And then all of a sudden you're out of it. And it's like, well, what do I do next? You have to start planning that next step before you get to that next step. Otherwise you're going to be sort of looking out, you're going to be searching around for answers when you graduate.
The joke I always make to our particularly our basketball and baseball players, all think they're going to play professionally, right?
Yep.
So I always talk to the guys, what's your major? What do you want to do? And like, I want to play baseball or basketball. I'm like, all right, if that goes perfect, you're going to retire in your mid 30s.
Right.
Hopefully, you're going to live to 100. What are you going to do for the next 65 years you're alive
Right.
when that's over? And realistically, it's going to end way before that. If we're looking at the statistics of professional sports, right?
Right.
So we got to get after it. We got to train. We got to get maximize your athletic potential. But if we're not talking about the future a little bit, we're doing these kids a disservice. So I try to be as good an influence on that as I possibly can.
So you may not be able to answer this question in any sort of consistent way, but when you ask a question like that, how do they react?
It ranges from, I'll be honest with you, man, it ranges from kids that have a very clear
Plan.
reality of what's going to happen when they graduate college. And their answer might be this: I'm going to play pro ball for as long as I can, and then I'm going to try to be a high school teacher and coach, whatever it might be, right? Right, to complete disillusioned, no idea how hard it is to play professionally, no idea that the numbers of anyone making a living that are astronomically low, and they're picking a major based around the class that fit around their practice schedule, and then they graduate and don't know what to do afterwards. Now, I
Yeah.
think we have some good things in place here to avoid that.
Mhm.
But I think if somebody's got to guide them a little bit too. But
Yes.
ideally, it's their parents. But if that's not always the case,
Yeah.
some adults got to like we got to think about what's after this because the best case scenario is it's over in your mid 30s. That's the best guys. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So you got to figure out a way to do something after that. But it's a really wide range of answers. One thing I will say, the majority of our baseball guys are kids from New Jersey, right? Two-parent homes, the whole travel ball thing, the same things. A lot of them from Monmouth County, honestly.
Yeah.
And they understand the world in a way that a kid that's coming from a different socioeconomic background, maybe not two parents, maybe not a great high school, maybe went to several high schools by the time we meet them, maybe had several AAU coaches be mentors in their life.
Yeah.
They have a different view of the
Yeah.
world than that baseball kid from Red Bank has, right?
Yep.
And my job is somewhat easy with those kids about seeing the world, and a little bit harder with those kids from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
But one thing I will say, probably the coolest thing about college athletics is I deal in my office at any given time. There's a baseball player from Red Bank Catholic hanging out with a basketball player from Europe, and we're having a conversation. And
Yeah.
when you're in college, really try to lean into that and be around, meet different people
That's
for
awesome.
athletics, and see the world through a different light. Because I know it's opened my eyes to so many things, and I like to think I've opened other people's eyes to a
Sure.
lot of things as
I
well.
love that. I love that. A couple more questions about the book before I let you go.
Yeah, man.
So maybe this is an obvious question, but like, who is the book geared towards? Who do you want to read the book?
Okay, I think, well, first of all, I want as many people as humanly possible to read the book so my daughter could have a great Christmas and go to a good college.
There you go.
But I got a Nissan with a lot of miles. I need a new one. But but realistically, I think there's two main audiences. One is high school sports coaches, AAU, Pop
Mhm.
Warner sports coaches, and personal trainers that have kids they're working with that they want to help get to the college level, right? And this book is I think a lot of these coaches are doing great things. I wouldn't at all step on anybody's toes, but this is what's going to be expected at the next level. Here's how
Mhm.
you can start helping your athletes a little bit better, clients a little bit better to prepare for the next level, right? And for them, it's kind of like a guidebook to kind of mix in what they're already doing and help
Yes.
their clients get better. And then I think the next market is student athletes that are thinking about playing in college and their parents. And for them, it's a recipe, it's a cookbook. Follow these steps. It's a 12-week program that starts, May of your senior year and takes you right through July to be ready for that August 1st report date. And then for them, you can just follow it the way it is. There's weekly training programs. There's a guide to prepare for common
Great.
conditioning test. So I think it kind of works for both audiences. As you said before, this information is not really out there,
Love
and
it.
I want to be the first person to really get it out.
I love it. That's great. So where do you find it? Where can people find the book?
Where you find everything else in the world on Amazon.com. Yeah, man. So I did my previous book, Finish Strong, Resist Training for Endurance Athletes, with a publisher called Bloomsbury. They're a European publisher. They didn't really see the vision for this because in Europe, college sports are not what they are in America. So
Right.
I respect their opinion on that. And I went ahead and did this one by myself on Amazon. Want to see how that goes. So Amazon.com, and just look for Angelo Gingerelli the next 4 years.
Awesome. That's great. One last question. I'll let you go. So, and I usually ask this question of all my guests, although sometimes it takes a little different form depending on where you're coming from. But like, if there's just one thing, right, one piece of advice that you would give a rising, first year student athlete coming into college, like, what's that one thing you would say, like, above all else, that they should pay attention to?
The phrase is do your research. Figure out what you signed up for, contact the people that are already doing it, and get ready to do that when you get there. Because chances are it's going to be a very similar experience, right?
Mhm.
So, as I tell people all the time, when you sign your NLI, put it on YouTube, make an Instagram reel. If you're of age, pop a bottle of champagne. Probably not if you're a high school athlete, but have a ball. Be a local celebrity for a couple of
Yeah.
days and lean into that and relish every minute of it. When that's over, contact the strength coach, contact the sport coaches, figure out what you got yourself into, and start today to get ready for it. Because that's we said before, that summer after your senior year is a special time, but it goes by fast. So start immediately, start getting ready, and then be physically ready when you get on campus because you're going to have a lot of other stressors in your life. Don't make physical unpreparedness one of them.
Yeah, that's great. Perfect. Angelo, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I appreciate you sharing all your wisdom, and it's been great getting to know you. And hopefully, we can do this again sometime.
This is great, man. Thank you so much. Keep doing the stuff you're doing with high school athletes. I think it's great. And I wish you and your company, this podcast, nothing but success moving forward.
Same to you. I appreciate it, Angelo. Take care.